What if a simple hum in a lonely kitchen could change the fate of two people who never believed they deserved anything more than survival? The frost arrived before the sun in Barrow Creek, decorating the cookhouse window with shining silver ferns. Evelyn Ward felt the cold before she even opened her eyes. It was late autumn in the Montana Territory, a quiet warning of the long winter waiting just beyond the mountains. The wind outside carried the smell of pine, snow, and loneliness. Inside the cookhouse, warmth pulsed from the iron stove. Evelyn worked in a steady rhythm, feeding the stove pine logs and preparing breakfast for the ranch hands. At 25, she understood this kitchen better than she understood herself. The hiss of bacon, the rise of soft dough, the click of her knife against the wooden block, all made up the language she lived by. She did not sing, not with words, but she hummed the old melodies her mother used to hum, songs that carried the memory of a home she barely remembered. That humming belonged to her quiet world, a world where she worked hard, kept her head down, and prayed the winter would not be too cruel. Molly, the assistant cook, clattered pans behind her. She was a tired girl with sharp words and a sharper stare, but Evelyn knew it came from a life with little softness. Mrs. Layton, the head cook, swept in moments later with cold air clinging to her coat, barking orders about bacon, bread, and the accounts that needed to be on Mr. Thatcher's desk by noon. Evelyn nodded, her hands always moving. This job was how she stayed fed and warm. It was her place in the world, small but steady. Across the ranch, Graham Thatcher stood on a ridge overlooking his land. The wind tugged at his sheepskin coat. At 31, he carried a name that felt too heavy, and a life planned long before he could shape it. He could read cattle, storms, and profit margins, but he could not read his own heart. Everyone said he should marry a banker's daughter from Helena. Everyone expected him to stand tall and proud as the heir to a great ranch. But deep inside, he was tired. He wanted something real, something that was his and not passed down like a saddle or a brand. Victor Hale, his foreman, rode up beside him. The man was as rough as old bark, loyal to the ranch but hateful toward anything that disturbed the order he believed in. He spoke of coyotes, winter storms, and Horace Pike, the banker who could destroy a man with a single stroke of a pen. Graham listened with a stiff jaw. Trouble was coming. Winter, debt, hungry predators. Whispers about Lydia Beaumont, the banker's daughter who was being pushed toward him like a fine horse up for sale. By afternoon, young Ben, the stable boy, returned from town with mail and gossip. Everyone was talking about the price of beef, the coming storm, and Lydia, bowing her head just enough to show she expected Graham to propose sooner than later. Evelyn felt none of that. Her world was the warm kitchen and the pages of her mother's recipe book that she kept tucked in her apron. Written inside were notes, memories, pieces of songs, and herbs that helped a person breathe easier in the cold. It was her only treasure. That afternoon, when the kitchen grew still between the lunch rush and dinner prep, Evelyn stood alone at the table making apple turnovers. The light from the west window landed on her hands as she rolled the dough thin and placed mounds of spiced apples at the center. Then it happened. Without thinking, she began to hum. A soft tune, a river song, a memory of her mother making bread on a cold morning like this one, a private melody meant only for herself. Outside, Graham Thatcher rode past the cookhouse. His head was crowded with thoughts of loans, dying grass, weak cattle, and an unwanted future. But then he heard something he had not heard in years, a woman humming. He stopped his horse without meaning to. The sound slipped through the small open crack in the window. Soft, honest, beautiful. It was as pure as the water that ran through the creek below the house. He sat there, listening, letting the tune wash the dust and worry from his mind. He did not know the words, but the sound felt right. It felt like something true in a world filled with heavy expectations. When the humming faded, he realized he could not simply ride away. He looked around, searching for something to leave behind. His eyes landed on a patch of mountain daisies by the fence. He plucked one, tore a clean page from his pocket ledger, and wrote a short message with a stub of pencil. He placed the daisy and the folded note on the cookhouse stoop, weighing it down with a smooth stone. Then he left without looking back. Later, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Evelyn stepped out to fetch water. She froze when she saw the daisy and the note. Her heart raced with fear and something warmer than fear. She unfolded the paper. I did not know kitchens could sing. Her breath caught. She felt heat rise to her cheeks. Someone had heard her. Someone had listened. A man like him noticing a woman like her was dangerous. Gossip could ruin her. It could throw her out into the cold with no job and nowhere to go, but she touched the soft petals with trembling fingers. And carefully, silently, she tucked the daisy into her recipe book. She did not know that this single, gentle moment was the start of something powerful enough to survive storms, gossip, and even fire. She only knew that for the first time in a long time, she felt seen. What happens when a quiet kindness begins to grow in a world ready to crush anything soft? The days after the note passed slowly, heavy with early winter clouds and the sharp breath of Montana wind. Evelyn kept the daisy hidden between the pages of her mother's recipe book. Every time she saw it, her heart tightened with warmth and fear. She told no one. She dared not. A single whisper could turn a small moment into a scandal. But something started to change. One morning, the heavy kitchen door, famous for groaning loud enough to wake the bunkhouse, swung open without a sound. Evelyn frowned, testing it twice. Someone had oiled the hinges in the night. Another day, she found neatly split firewood stacked beside her stove, far more than she usually received. It wasn't the rough, knotty pine meant for the bunkhouse kitchen. It was clean, dense wood that burned hot and long. Someone had carried it there before dawn. When a storm wind ripped a shingle from the old cookhouse roof, she expected it to stay broken for days. Repairs always required a request through Victor Hale. But at sunrise the next morning, the new shingle was already nailed in place, bright fresh wood against old gray. She didn't need to wonder who had done these things. Graham Thatcher never mentioned the humming. She never mentioned the note. But when he walked past the kitchen on his way to the stables, he paused, just a heartbeat longer than necessary. Sometimes he said good morning, his voice low and warm. Sometimes their eyes met for an instant that felt longer than a breath. That was enough to start a quiet fire in her heart. And yet the fear walked close behind the warmth. People whispered in Barrow Creek. They whispered about everything. A ranch owner looking toward a cook? That sort of whisper could ruin her. Still, when Graham appeared at the door one afternoon, Duke saddled behind him, she felt something shift inside her. "Care for a short walk, Miss Ward?" he asked gently. He wasn't commanding. He wasn't flirting. It wasn't the way men at the saloon smirked at the serving girls. It was an honest invitation. She hesitated. Her place was the kitchen. His place was the main house. Their worlds were not meant to touch, but the truth sat clear in his eyes. She found herself nodding. They walked to the windy hill overlooking the ranch. There, under the wide Montana sky, the walls around Graham's heart began to loosen. He spoke not like a ranch owner, but like a man carrying a weight he no longer wanted to bear alone. He told her how the Thatcher legacy felt like a saddle he couldn't remove. He spoke of hard years, drought, debts, and his fear that he was failing men who depended on him. Evelyn listened with a stillness that steadied him. She didn't interrupt. She didn't try to fix anything. She offered something rarer, understanding. On their next walk, he brought her a gift, a leather-bound journal. The pages blank and full of possibility. "I thought of you when I saw it," he said, eyes trained on the horizon. "If your kitchen has a song, then your words deserve a place to live too." That night, Evelyn opened the journal in the soft glow of her stove. She wrote down a recipe, then a memory, then a line from the river song she hummed. Slowly, her voice, quiet, unsure, but true, began to fill the pages. But winter creeps into places warmth tries to protect. Talk began in town. At first it was small, a humming cook, a ranch owner who lingered too long near the kitchen. Extra firewood no one could explain. Gossip spread like wildfire, and the cruelest sparks came from Lydia Beaumont. Lydia arrived on the afternoon stagecoach wearing a fine wool dress and a dustless smile. She swept into the main house with the confidence of a woman who believed the world belonged to her. When she met Evelyn, she looked her up and down, simple calico dress, flour-dusted apron, and smiled in a way that wasn't a smile at all. "So you're the little songbird," she said sweetly. "Graham spoke of your rustic charm." Every word was meant to slice. Ben tried to cheer Evelyn. "Miss Beaumont looks like a china doll. She'd break if she had to wash one skillet," he said with a grin. "Mr. Graham likes your kind of real, not her kind of fancy." But reality had sharp edges. One morning, Graham returned from meeting Horace Pike at the bank with a face carved from worry. Pike warned him the ranch's loan could be called in before Christmas if the cattle stayed thin. The ranch was on a knife's edge. Evelyn felt the weight of it like a stone in her stomach. All the small moments between them could vanish beneath a tide of debt and duty. Then came the harvest jubilee. Evelyn didn't want to go. Crowds made whispers grow louder. But Mrs. Layton insisted. The ranch needed pies for the charity sale. In the dusty town square filled with music, smoke, and laughter, the whispers sharpened. Victor Hale leaned on a post, watching her with a smirk. Ranch wives eyed her with cold curiosity. Ranch hands looked away, unsure. And then Lydia walked up with Graham at her side. She smiled at Evelyn's pies and said loudly, "Do you sing to make them rise? Some creatures get attention with little tricks." The crowd laughed. It was the kind of laughter that breaks something inside a person. Evelyn stood still, spine straight, refusing to let shame claim her. But her heart trembled. And then the sound of hooves pounded through the laughter. Graham rode forward, eyes blazing, anger controlled but fierce. He dismounted, stepped beside Evelyn, and faced the crowd with cold calm. His voice cut the air. "My family name means nothing without the people who give it life. Miss Ward feeds this ranch. Her work has more honor than gossip ever will." Silence fell. Then he added, steady and clear, "I would rather build a life with a woman who sings in her kitchen than waste a day with one who speaks only to impress." The town froze. Evelyn's breath caught. She had never been defended like that. Never been protected with such simple truth. Graham packed her pies into baskets, offered his arm, and walked her through the stunned crowd. But in the shadows near the bank, Horace Pike watched with cold, calculating eyes. If he couldn't break Graham Thatcher with whispers, he would burn down the kitchen that held Evelyn's song. What happens when the place that gave her a voice becomes the target of a man who wants to silence it forever? The wind changed without warning. It had blown steady from the north for days, cold but predictable. But on this night, it shifted east, turning fierce. It slammed into the ranch with enough force to rattle loose boards and push smoke back down through chimneys. Inside the old cookhouse, Evelyn was cleaning up after supper. The fire in the great iron stove was low. The air felt strange, heavy. She paused, listening. A puff of gray smoke slid out of the stove vent and drifted into the room. That had never happened before. Outside, hidden by darkness and screaming wind, Victor Hale crouched at the base of the chimney. His greed had swallowed his sense long ago. Horace Pike had whispered promises of power and money. All Victor had to do was create a situation, something that would make the cookhouse unsafe, push Graham into signing a harsher loan. He told himself he wasn't hurting anyone, just making a point, just smoke damage, nothing more. He shoved oily rags into the chimney's clean-out grate. The wind did the rest. Inside, a thicker cloud of smoke billowed into the kitchen. Evelyn coughed hard, eyes watering. The room was filling too fast. She hurried toward the door, but the smoke choked her breath. Her vision blurred. A hot ember, pushed out by the backdraft, fell onto a pile of oil rags she had left on the floor. A tiny flame crawled up the cloth, then leapt to the wood. Fire came alive. Evelyn grabbed a bucket, desperate to fight it, but her lungs seized, coughing tearing through her. The smoke swallowed her. The room tilted. Each breath hurt more than the last. She stumbled, fell. The world went black. Across the ranch, Graham sat in his father's study, a cold feeling wrapping itself around his chest. He stared out the window. Smoke. But not the right kind. It wasn't rising from the chimney. It was pouring out under the eaves. Before he knew he was moving, he was running. His boots hit the ground hard. The wind tore at his clothes. His heart hammered one word again and again. Evelyn. He threw his shoulder against the cookhouse door. It was barred from the inside. Once. Twice. On the third hit, the wood splintered, and the door flew open. A wall of heat blasted him back, but he pushed forward, covering his mouth with his kerchief. The flames hissed, climbing the wall. Smoke thickened the air into darkness. He called her name, but his voice was swallowed by the roar. He found her by tripping over her. She was lying near the fire, small and frighteningly still. He dropped to his knees, scooped her into his arms and ran. Flames licked his sleeve. His shirt caught fire. He beat it out with his free hand and kept running. He didn't stop until he crashed out into the freezing night. People came running from the bunkhouse. Ben, first, then Mrs. Layton, and the hands. They grabbed blankets and water, shouts rising into the storm-filled sky. Inside the main house, they laid Evelyn on a sofa in front of the big fireplace. Graham knelt beside her, wiping soot from her face with trembling hands. Then, finally, she coughed. Her eyes opened, and she saw him. Smoke-streaked face, burned sleeve, hands shaking as he touched her cheek like she was the most fragile thing in the world. He leaned close. His voice was low and rough with fear. "If your kitchen is your song," he whispered, "then let me be the walls that keep it safe." Evelyn's breath caught. Tears slipped from the outer corners of her eyes. She lifted one shaking hand and touched his cheek. That was her answer. The cookhouse burned down to a skeleton of charred beams. For 3 days, its black frame stood like a warning. But on the morning of the 4th day, the sound of hammers filled the yard. Graham Thatcher was done being pushed. He rebuilt the cookhouse from the ground up. Taller chimney, safer stove, wider windows to let in sunlight, doors that shut clean and firm. He didn't order men to do it. He helped build it himself. When the new cookhouse stood finished, bright, sturdy, and full of promise, he hung a wooden sign over the door with his own hands. The quiet stove, where her songs feed us all. Evelyn's hands shook when she saw it. The room was full of ranch hands, townsfolk, even Mrs. Turnley with her famous strawberry preserves. They weren't whispering anymore. They were waiting. So she lifted her chin, breathed deep, and began to sing. Her voice filled the new kitchen like a rising dawn. By the time she finished, there were tears in the eyes of men who'd weathered 20 winters. Even Graham looked away, jaw tight, overwhelmed. A new life had begun. But the thaw hadn't reached everyone. Horace Pike still wanted the ranch. He came with an appraiser, ready to declare Graham's cattle too thin, ready to call in the loan that would ruin him. Victor Hale tried one last desperate move. He cornered Ben, threatened him. But Ben didn't break. And neither did Molly. They brought out the stable logs. They brought out the burned rags. They brought out the candle wax. The evidence was clear. Victor had blocked the chimney. In the Beaver's Tail saloon, the entire town gathered as if called to a courtroom. The sheriff, the pastor, ranchers, cowboys, Lydia Beaumont, her pride cracked open. Evelyn stood before them all. Steady, calm. "I do not know why Mr. Hale did what he did," she said softly. "I only know what happened. And I know I am alive because Mr. Thatcher walked through fire to save me." She didn't need to shout. Truth doesn't shout. Lydia stepped forward too. "I was wrong about her," she said, "cruel to her, but I know what it is to be valued for all the wrong reasons. I believe her." The room shifted. Through a single choice, Lydia earned her own freedom from the role she'd been forced into. The sheriff turned to Victor. "You're fired. And you're leaving this territory by sunrise." Then he turned to Pike. "And your valuation? It'll be done again tomorrow." In front of the entire town. Pike's face fell, his power evaporated. By the next afternoon, the ranchers gathered and gave a fair valuation. Graham's herd was strong enough. More than strong enough. The ranch was safe. The quiet stove was safe. Evelyn was safe. Spring arrived with soft grass and warm winds. The ranch healed. The town healed. The new cookhouse became the heart of the valley. Travelers rode miles just to taste her meals. Her songs became known as the voice of Barrow Creek. Graham stood beside her every day, hauling flour, serving plates, leaning close to hear her laugh. He carried none of the pride that once isolated him and all of the calm strength she needed. Their love didn't need grand speeches. It lived in simple acts. A fixed hinge, a tied bootlace, a flower in a jar, a journal filled with recipes and songs. One morning at dawn, they rode up the windy hill. The sun rose slow and golden. Evelyn looked out over the ranch that had once been only a place to survive. Now it was home. She began to sing. Full, bright, and free. Graham paused his work, turned toward her, and smiled. A quiet, complete smile that said everything without a single word. This was their life now, a shared labor, a quiet song. A love built from small acts that never broke. A love strong enough to walk through fire.